You can move your bill, Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House File 1148, recommended to be laid over for possible inclusion in a later bill.
First of all, we should bring up an A2 amendment. Representative Hillstrom, this amendment didn't meet the deadline, correct? And however, it is a technical clarifying in nature, and historically, we've allowed this if they're not controversial, if it meets with your approval.
Mr. Chair, I actually spoke to Representative O'Neill, and I said we had no concern with hearing the amendment today.
Okay, thank you, Representative Hillstrom. With that, you want to move your amendment? A2?
Mr. Chair, I move the A2 amendment.
Okay. Having heard that, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, your bill is amended before us, Representative O'Neill. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, today I have before you we're going to move, hopefully if this bill passes and we get through this, move the HRO, the harassment restraining orders, closer to what the OFP system is. And I'm going to let the testifiers kind of talk about the history, but the reality is when a police officer rolls up to a scene and they can't see an HRO, they can't see a harassment restraining order on their system. So this moves this in that direction. We don't have a database built, but it allows the court to build a database or combine it with the OFP system. It does some permissive things. It also broadens the scope, members, so that the HRO can be served by all peace officers instead of just the sheriffs. It expands the hours in which the HRO can be served. It also creates a short form notification that's once the database is set up, so that the peace officers can serve that in lieu of personal service. And if the respondent wants the long form, it directs them on how to obtain it, either from a law enforcement agency or from the district court. It also, like I said, gives permission for the data network to be created so that we can have the systems together. And I know that was the plan a decade ago, and it never seemed to come to fruition, and I believe it is time for the safety of the victims in order to move this forward. And with that, I'd like to turn over to my two testifiers.
Go ahead
morning.
with your name and title and begin.
Bree Adams-Bill. I'm the program director at the St. Paul and Ramsey County Domestic Abuse Intervention Project. And I'm here just to start with some historical context of why these suggested changes are so important when it comes to victims of domestic violence, especially in the context of they do have the option of filing an order for protection. Over the last 10 years or so, domestic abuse advocates like me have worked with multiple victims of domestic violence needing a different option than the order for protection for a couple obstacles directly tied to the order for protection. One is that in order for a victim of domestic violence to petition the court for an order for protection, they need to specify the exact physical violence that has taken place in that relationship. And a lot of victims tend to not want to do that for a few reasons. Not only the, I think, obvious humiliation and embarrassment of that, but also for fear of retaliation by the abuser that they want to serve that order on. The abuser gets a copy of that, they see it, and it's now become your airing or dirty laundry. The second piece, why it's an obstacle, are specific to battered women that are mothers that want to file against their children's father. And here's the issue. In 2008, the Minnesota Supreme Court held that in an order for protection, if there is a recognition of parentage, that particular abusive father can ask for parenting time in an order for protection hearing. Cannot anywhere else, but can in an order for protection. There's a process already in place for an unadjudicated father to establish custody and parenting rights, and that's through family court. But essentially, in domestic abuse advocates' opinions, having this be tied to an order for protection has greatly impacted women's ability that are mothers to decide, do I protect my children and file an order for protection, or am I giving more access to a batterer that wouldn't normally have access? So a likely option in both of those scenarios that I just said is filing a harassment restraining order. Why? First, a harassment restraining order, you do not need to detail out the physical or sexual violence that's in the relationship. What you can talk about, what a victim can talk about, is the harassment that's always there. If you know anything about battering, it's always there. And they just have to talk about the unwanted, undesired acts, gestures by their batterer. That's enough. The second reason is harassment restraining order cannot provide relief. It does not address custody. It does not address parenting time. It absolutely does not. But what it does do, similar to an order for protection, is restrain an abusive person to not have any contact. So, that being said, this is why I and advocates like me are in support of these changes, because we want the harassment restraining orders to match the order for protection in service, so that enforcement of that order can be done 24/7, and also violations can occur just as they do in the order for protection, when there's an order for protection filed. The other piece about it I want to just add is that it is crucial to victims of domestic violence and domestic abuse advocates that safety plan with them, that there is the option of not just one entity to serve these orders. We need our patrol cops on the street serving these orders. We need our probation officers. We need jail staff. We work with them all the time to get service quickly, swiftly, immediately to those that need to be restrained. And we would like the same in this. So that's why we're in support of this bill.
Thank you very much. Questions yet? If none, your other testifier, with your name and title, sir.
Thank you, sir. Sergeant David McCabe with the St. Paul Police Department. I have just some context. I have 5 years of experience working in our family violence unit. I currently work in our sex crimes unit. So I have some professional experience both serving harassing restraining orders, investigating order violations, and such. Currently, the process by statute is that harassing restraining orders can only be served by the county sheriff during the day, during the week, and excluding holidays. If an officer or even a sheriff's deputy encounters an unserved respondent of an HRO on a suspicious call or a call for service, they can't see that unserved order in a routine check that they normally would for other orders. There is no state database that law enforcement can see these orders until they are served. This differs greatly from the order for protections. The service process for that is any law enforcement officer can serve an order for protection. It can be served by short form, which means it can be served 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And unserved order for protections can be seen through routine checks by law enforcement. As you just heard, these problems prevent law enforcement from effectively enforcing these court orders and addressing domestic violence. It also delays the time in which these orders can be served. It puts law enforcement in a position of not knowing valuable information when we arrive on the scene of one of the most deadly calls for law enforcement, domestic violence. It puts law enforcement in a position of not knowing valuable information where a crime may be occurring in their presence. This process also creates a redundancy between police officers and sheriff's deputies, creates a cost of time, eliminates efficiency, and creates needless paper. In addition, this change will better serve anyone who seeks relief through the courts on an HRO as well. We are just seeking to have the service of order for protections match that of harassing restraining orders across the state. In conclusion, law enforcement is asking the state to allow us and direct us through statute to serve and enforce harassing restraining orders, just as we already do with order for protections. This will allow us to better serve those who seek relief from the courts and protection by law enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This proposal came from my city, and I'm really grateful to Representative O'Neill for advancing it. I get the chance to work with Sergeant McCabe and Ms. Adams' bill regularly in my non-legislative work, so many thanks to them. They do phenomenal work. And Ms. Adams' bill and I have had many vigorous debates on domestic violence policy, so I'm really grateful to you for being here. So thank you.
Thank you. And Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I also wanted to thank Representative O'Neill. I'm also a co-author on this bill. I just wanted to speak a little bit about why service is so important. In my other role, I work exclusively with domestic violence cases, and essentially, you know, we hear from victims that why even go through this process? What is this paper even worth? Well, the paper is only really worth something to me as a prosecutor if it's served, because in order for us to charge somebody with a crime for violating the order, the easiest way to prove that they knew about the order is through service. And so I just wanted to touch on that piece about why that is so critical, because that's what puts the teeth to actually having an order. And then another piece to that is that we know that folks who are willing to violate court orders, that those cases are, when we look at lethality risk, are some of our highest risk cases. And so, you know, for someone to, they might know that they have an order against them, but if I can't prove it, I can't hold them accountable, and then we're in an even riskier place because there's no consequences for them violating the order. And so just one question I had, and I apologize, Representative O'Neill, I didn't have a chance to talk to you before our committee today. Just with the amendment, do we have an idea of when this information would be available? Because I've worked closely with the courts, and I know sometimes that can be burdensome. So all really great things, but we would need to make sure that this system is available in order to make this work.
Mr. Chair.
Whoever would like to. Representative O'Neill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Becker-Finn. So that is something that we've been discussing quite a bit with the BCA, and we're still waiting to hear back from the courts. And so what this language is doing is giving permission to move forward. And then we're going to be working with hopefully OJP, who actually funded the OFP database. And then we're still trying to figure out, can it be incorporated in the OFP database, or does it need to be a separate database? So those are all fantastic questions. We are still working them out. We met last Friday and hashed out a lot of things, but we're just not quite sure how that is going to work. We need to hear back from the courts. But this is the first step in giving the permission, and we can move forward and then ask the courts to, again, let us know what needs to happen, and then we'll work on a granting process, hopefully through OJP. Hopefully it won't be as expensive as last time, and I just don't have all the answers. I would love to have it snapped on tomorrow and be available. It's going to take a little bit of time to build and to put together, but that is the very next step. This is the first step so that we can actually allow it to happen.
Representative Becker-Finn?
Thank you. Just to follow up real quick, it's a great bill. I really want to see it actually take effect. So I thank you for your work on that, and just I don't know that anyone from the courts or OJP is here today, but just to continue to keep the pressure on that so we can make this become law. So thank you.
Okay, Representative Johnson.
Mr. Chair, Representative O'Neill, I want to thank you for bringing this. My career in law enforcement, HROs were the biggest nightmare we had. Because if it was in another county, we had to wait for the faxes, for them to fax the order so we could actually see what the order is, so we could see what to do. So I'm glad this is coming forward. I take it you've requested a fiscal note, because I do see a lot of costs in here, unfortunately. And I'd like to say I do want to see this go forward. But I think my concern is it probably won't go forward till MNLARS is done. That nightmare that they've been doing over there for, I don't know how many years, seems like a decade. Have you heard when MNLARS, any idea when MNLARS is going to be done so they could incorporate this in?
Representative O'Neill?
Mr. Chair, Representative Johnson. So as I understand it, the OFP part of it is not in MNLARS, unless I misunderstood that, but I believe MNLARS is supposed to be done at the end of this year. But I'm not on that committee, so I might be incorrect in that. But in talking with the department, I think they had said the end of this year. But I believe this system would hopefully be incorporated in the current OFP system. And if not, then they would have to build a separate system, which of course would be a little more cumbersome. But I can tell you that when they did the OFP system, it was about $1 million, and they did get a grant in order to do that. So hopefully there will be very little cost in the general fund money, and maybe none. We're hoping to do that through a granting process.
Representative Johnson?
Mr. Chair, Representative O'Neill, I'm not sure how this system works. All I know is that when we'd run a name, that information would pop up. So it's got to be tied into MNLARS somehow, and I don't see any problem adding in the HRO into the restraining order database. It might be fairly simple to do. At least I'm hoping that's it. But it's going to be, the biggest problem would be at the local level with all the data entry they have to do. Because the harassment restraining orders probably outnumbered the OFPs 10 to 1. So it's going to be a lot of information that's going to have to be entered. But thanks for bringing this forward. It's clear up a lot of issues.
Okay, members, any questions? Any input from the public? Okay, with that, the chair will lay over House File 1148 as amended for possible inclusion into the omnibus bill. Thank you very much, Representative O'Neill.